Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a small business owner, investor, a work and process improv artist, a bit manic, and always looking for something new and interesting to entertain me. I am a TV host and your host right now for what we call the Second Scene Podcast. It's a Dweebs global production where you can go for free resume help, mental health assistance, and so much more. And there's no catch. We're completely confidential and we're completely free. It's free. So go to dweebsglobal.org. I am here today with Gary Arndt. He went from being a 90s internet entrepreneur to a world traveler and photographer. And when I say world traveler, he has been to over 7 continents. He actually did that all in 1 year, I think 2012, all 50 states and every US territory twice. He's just been everywhere over and over and over again. He's one of the longest running, if not the longest running, travel blogs on the internet. So welcome, Gary.
Thanks for having me.
Did that give you a good description of you, or did I miss something in there?
You hit the big points.
Okay. So what were you doing in the 90s? You had internet startups, I'm guessing? You were an entrepreneur?
I was at the right place at the right time. I had graduated college, and guy I lived with in college, I was living with him after, and he had started to write a product. So the internet was really in its early stages. We're talking 9600 baud modems. Netscape hadn't even been created yet. We were using the browser from the University of Illinois. And he had a brother who said, you should make it easy to hook up a database to a website. Because back then there wasn't PHP, there wasn't WordPress, there wasn't Linux, there wasn't any of this stuff, right? And it was hard. You had to get like an Oracle server and our Sun server with a copy of Oracle. And it was this really expensive proposition to even serve up a simple HTML web page. So he wrote this product called Cold Fusion. It's now owned by Adobe. Right. And he also said, well, you should make it run on this new operating system that's coming out called Windows NT, which was the new Microsoft server that you could run on just a normal computer.
Right.
And it dramatically lowered the cost of serving up web pages, and it allowed for the dynamic creation. And he had companies coming to him saying, well, we would like our company's website to use your product. And he didn't actually want to build the websites. So he turned to me and he said, well, do you want to do it? So I was like, sure. So I started building these database driven websites, which at the time were kind of novel. Now everything does it. And I had more people that wanted it done. So I hired a friend who hired a friend. And a couple of years later, I'm 28 years old and I got a company with 50 people. And I ended up selling it to a big international company that, wanted to get into that business. And I did it before the .com bubble burst, thankfully. So that was kind of what I did. I was in the right place at the right time and just made the best of it. And, after that business, I started another one where I had a network of video game websites. And I remember we had to have an entire rack in a server room to host the website and the database and everything. And we thought we were doing really well because in that same server room, I think was Shop NBC, and they had like a wall of racks and everything. Today, you could just buy that for, $50 a month or something for hosting, and it would be absolutely trivial. So yeah, things are so much better today than they were then.
Oh, right. So you had the racks. A rack is essentially it's instead of a rack of clothing, it's a rack of computers.
Like a closet, yeah.
Right.
But filled with electronics.
Right. It's very hot in those server centers where they have tons of racks. It's nice that we don't have to have them in our own places anymore. I had an internet company back in the day, and we had that as well. It was really neat. It was neat growing up at that time because everything was new. So it was almost like everything you created was something somebody else hadn't created yet.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you're probably in the same generation I am, kind of a Gen Xer. We're kind of overlooked, but I've done a lot of interviews where I point out, well, we're the ones that actually made everything, and I think it's still kind of true. If you look at the Elon Musk and the Larry Pages and all those people, I'm like they're kind of all in the same generation.
It's true. We were the first. We laid the groundwork, and they built on top of it. So I'm proud of what I did back then. I had so much fun. That was such a blast for me, spending the nights in the office and just creating. All right, so you sold that business, and then what made you decide to travel the world? I
had sold that business, then the .com bubble hit, and it was really hard to raise money and to start a business. It was just not a good time. I think if you look at a lot of successful companies, you'll see a lot of them started before that happened or after that happened. But then there's this kind of chasm in the early 2000s where kind of nothing happened. So I was when I went to college, I was one of the top academic debaters in the country. And I spent a lot of time doing that. And I came close. I never won a national championship, but I came pretty close. And I always said, well, if I could go back to college, I would either blow off all my classes like a football player, just get D's and everything, and focus on debate and try to win a national title. Well, I couldn't go back and do that. Or I would go back and I would get a degree in physics. And I thought I could still do that. And so I went back to school and I spent 2.5 years studying, and I just took science and math classes, and ended up actually focusing on geology and geophysics because I found that kind of to be the most interesting. And I was in my mid 30s at the time, and I kind of saw what a lot of the PhD students were going through. And I realized that, getting a PhD at that point in your life is probably not the wisest career move. And it just hit me one day. It's like, I don't have kids. I don't have a wife. I don't really have anything going on. There's nothing stopping me from traveling. When I sold my business, the company I sold it to, I sort of conned them into sending me to their offices around the world to talk about app development. And so they sent me, I was on a 3-week whirlwind tour. They sent me to Tokyo, Taipei, Singapore, Frankfurt, Brussels, Paris, and London. First time I'd ever really been anywhere, right? So I literally circumnavigated the globe, and I really liked it. It was a real eye-opening experience. I always kind of wanted to do it again. I took a few trips out of the US. I went to Iceland and Argentina. And in 2005, I came up with this idea of, I'm going to sell my house and travel around the world. And it took me 18 months to tie up all the loose ends. I had to sell my home. And this was before, again, the housing market dropped out. So I sold it in 2007. It was a little soft, but not as bad as it got in 2008. And March 2007, I turned over the keys to the house and set out to travel around the world.
Wow, power to you. Most I know a lot of people dream that, but actually doing it is a whole nother.
Well, I thought I would travel for a year or two, and it just ended up being a decade. I just never stopped, and I just kind of kept doing it because, as it turns out, the world's really big. And if you've ever been to a restaurant, you've heard the expression, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, and you order too much or you order something that's too big. Mm-hmm. The same is true when you're travel planning. You can look at all these books and it's like, oh, I want to go here. I want to go here. I want to go here. But when you actually do it, it's time consuming, and it's a lifetime endeavor. It's not something you can just do in a single year. And as I've traveled more, and I've been to a lot of places, there's more stuff I learn about that I want to go visit. So if you remember that Donald Rumsfeld interview from the Iraq, where he talks about unknown unknowns, things you don't even know you don't know. There are so many unknown unknowns I had when I started that I've now are known unknowns, these things that I now know about, but I haven't been there and whatnot, that the list just keeps growing. So
I'm sure what's been the biggest change in your life, I guess, mentally, because of travel, because of what you've seen and done?
When I was early in my travels, normally if you go on a trip, in the back of your mind is the realization that eventually you go home. The trip will end. Either it's a good trip or a bad trip, you'll be done. And it dawned on me, I think I was in Hawaii, and I had this realization, I'm not going home. I don't have a home to go to. This is it, what I'm doing today. And, this has been, it'll be 14 years this March since I started. And I have slept in, probably thousands of beds at this point in different rooms. And it teaches you to appreciate just where you are at that moment is where you are. And that's just kind of how you live your life. And, I had a pretty big house before I started traveling. I will never do that again. When I still travel a lot, not this year, but a couple of years ago, I got an apartment just so I could go somewhere between trips. And I still travel half the year to, a third of the year around there. A very small. I really see no need to have anything like that again. So it's definitely, and it's given me a greater appreciation of culture, not just, oh, they have this food and they wear this clothes, but really in terms of how people think and the importance of it. And it really, it's a much deeper thing, I think, even than most people realize.
Right. It's a connection with people that is hard to make sometimes because of the cultural differences and the different ways people think. I guess that has probably gotten easier for you over time just because you've understood it better. Have you felt like that?
The first place I visited that was a foreign country was Tahiti, and they spoke French. In the big scheme of things, not the most challenging place to visit, but I'm by myself and I don't speak French. So it kind of terrified me at first. Now you could drop me in Turkmenistan, no problem. I don't speak Turkmen. But it's just, I get it now. I have the experience, I have the confidence, and those things don't phase me anymore. So I have no problem really going anywhere and not worrying about the language or anything else because I know I can get by.
Got you. How far in advance do you plan where you're going on your next trip? Is it?
Well, when I first started, I went west. That's as planned as it was.
That was
Go west. It ended up taking me 6 months to cross the Pacific Ocean because I just went island hopping. I went to all these little countries that no one ever visits. As my website became more popular, because I was visiting a lot of oddball places, I eventually started working with people in the travel and tourism industry. I'd work with tourism boards, travel companies, and opportunities would arise. Would you like to visit this place and write about it? And so a lot of what I do now is based on whatever opportunities come up. And sometimes an opportunity will come up and then I'll go do something myself. So I had to go to a meeting last February in Portugal because I'm on the board of directors of a big travel writer organization. And afterwards, I just spent 10 days on my own, rented a car, drove around Portugal because I was there already. And I'll do things like that where I'll do speaking things at a conference. So an example, a couple of years ago, I spoke at an event in Manila and they said, well, where are you flying in from? And I said, Minneapolis. Where are you flying out to? I said, Fiji. Because they were flying me in and out.
Why not?
And then from Fiji, I went to Tuvalu, which is the only country in the Pacific I hadn't been to. Went back to Fiji. Then I went to American Samoa. Now, why did I go to American Samoa? One, I was trying to visit every national park in the United States. I need to go to American Samoa National Park. But two, I was speaking at another event in San Diego. And I asked where they would fly me from. And they said, well, any domestic flight. Well, it turns out American Samoa counts as a domestic flight. So I got a flight from American Samoa to San Diego, and then they flew me back to Minneapolis.
Found the loophole.
So I'll do that kind of stuff all the time with speaking engagements and things like that to visit things I haven't visited before.
And you may have just given a whole bunch of business travelers some ideas that aren't going to please their bosses.
Oh, I did that back in the 90s when I had my own company. I would fly out somewhere, and then you'd usually get a cheaper ticket if you did a Saturday stayover. So I would gladly volunteer, and then I would go visit national parks or historic sites or whatever on my day off, and then fly back. So yeah, I even did that with regular business trips.
Nice. How are you handling COVID right now, not traveling?
Oh, it sucked ass. 95% of my income just dried up. I confess this was a blind spot. I didn't think that the global travel and tourism industry would disappear, it would be gone like the rapture.
How
I
could
didn't
you
see
not,
that coming.
How could you not expect that? I mean, I'm kidding.
People don't realize this is one of the biggest industries in the world, right? It was on a par with like agriculture and energy. I mean, that's how big it was. And it never dawned on me that it would just disappear. So what I ended up doing is I started a new podcast in July. That's not exactly a travel show, but it's a daily scripted history podcast. And that's been taking up all my time, and it's actually growing and doing really well. So I'm kind of keeping busy doing that right now. But when travel comes back, I now have a amazing platform to start selling tours and stuff because, I deal with history and everything. I just have some great ideas for what I want to do now a lot of the tours it's like, okay, we're going to Italy, we fly into Rome, and then we go to Venice, Florence, blah, 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 and you just visit all these places for just maybe even staying in Rome for a week and just going to all the places nobody knows about because there are so many of them that, because everyone just goes to the Colosseum in the Vatican, right? But you can actually visit Nero's palace, which they only discovered in the late 40s, that because it was buried. And all the original artwork, the paintings, 2,000-year-old stuff, still there. And no one knows about it. And there's stuff like this all over Rome and in the surrounding areas that I think would just make for a really cool tour. And I think planning other ones for like Istanbul and these other places where you can really go in depth in one spot.
That sounds great. I so many people travel and don't want to just do like the main touristy attractions, and it's sometimes hard to find the other gems. What's the name of your podcast and your website?
Everything Everywhere is the name of the pod. Everything Everywhere Daily is the show. That's also the name of the travel website that I've had for forever. I just use the same branding for it. Thankfully, when I picked the name for it, I picked the literally most generic name in the world, so I could kind of bend it to whatever I wanted.
That works. What's the most dangerous situation you found yourself in unexpectedly?
2010, I was in Bangkok, and there was these very big protests going on, hundreds of thousands of people. And one day they were going to they were going to do a protest at the prime minister's house, which was a few blocks from where I was staying. And what they were going to do is dump human blood on his front gate. So they had taken blood samples from thousands of people, and they had literally filled up plastic jugs filled with human blood. So I was like, okay, I got to see this. And so I took my camera and there was all these police with riot gear lined up the street before the prime minister's house and thousands of protesters. And I was between them. And I was just a white guy with a fancy camera. And it was exhilarating. There was a lot of traditional media there, and they all had helmets and armbands and body armor. And I just had an umbrella because it might rain. And but I got some amazing photos, and that was really fun. And there was another time in Cambodia. I went to this really remote temple. It took hours to drive there, hours to drive back on the back of a motorbike. And we were coming back to Siem Reap, and it was after dark, and this car stopped. And the guy who was my guide and the driver, his dad was a cop, and he had given him his revolver for the day. And he had it under the seat. You know how a seat flips up on a motorcycle. And as he's talking to these guys in Khmer, I have no idea what they're saying. He lifts the seat, he puts his hand there where the gun was. And they're talking. And then the car leaves. He puts the seat back down. He just tells me, okay, we got to go. And I still to this day do not know what happened, but we then left quickly.
You didn't ask, and I'd be dying to know why my life was just in danger. I read that you landed and were launched from a nuclear aircraft carrier. I'm guessing this is from a jet. I can't imagine that experience or how scary that's got to be.
It was not on a jet, actually.
Oh.
So I was invited by the U.S. Navy to come and visit the USS Harry S. Truman. They were doing training and maneuvers off the coast of Virginia. So we went to Norfolk, and they have these small cargo planes that are designed for aircraft carriers. I believe it's called a C-2 Greyhound, but they're rather small and the wings fold up. So they're designed for landing and taking off on carriers. So we landed, we did the tailhook landing, stayed on the ship overnight, got to photograph. We got to spend some time on the deck while they were doing takeoffs and landings of fighter jets, which is a really dangerous place to be. It is incredible because it is like this deadly ballet where you have $100 million jets, bombs, fuel, and everyone has a colored shirt and everyone knows what they're doing and it all works. And you're just, they say, stay here, do not move. And I don't. took pictures of it. And the next day we got launched on the same plane. And I assure you, you will never have a experience more acceleration in your life. You're actually sitting backwards in the plane. And normally when you're in a car that's accelerating, you're sitting forward. And so you go backwards. But with this, you're going to fly forward, and you're in a 4-point harness. You have goggles, you have a helmet, you have an ear covering for sound, and you have to put your hands in your harness like this, because otherwise they're going to fly forward when you take off. And you have to put your knees up on the seat. And you know it's coming, and you know it's coming like a Band-Aid getting ripped off. And then when it happens, I almost passed out. It was that much acceleration. And the guy sitting next to me, right next to me, was the head coach of the Navy football team, who was also invited. And we're in the air, so we could take off all of our sound stuff and our goggles. And I just turned to him and I said, man, I almost passed out. And he just goes to me, I did. And he was a pretty big guy. But that was an amazing experience.
Oh, well, that all sounds like, it sounds incredible to me, but I would be so sick. One of the biggest nightmares of mine you did, which was spelunking. That is where you essentially are cave diving or cave exploring, but they're really thin, right? Like you can barely fit your body in.
There were parts. So it was in Mulu National Park in Malaysia, which, if you're ever on the island of Borneo, highly, highly, highly recommend. They have some caves there that are just, I think they found one in Vietnam, which is larger, but at the time, Deer Cave was the largest single cavern in the world. Like you could put multiple stadiums inside of it. And there's several million bats that live in this cave. And every night they go out to feed in the rainforest, and they have a bat viewing area where you can see this river of black coming out of the cave. But they also, because it's a limestone karst area, they have a lot of different caves. And one of the days we went out, and you had the helmet with the light on it and everything else. And yeah, we went caving. And there were parts of the cave where you kind of had to get on your belly and crawl through, and other parts you had to climb up on a rope. And it was completely dark, the entire time. There's absolutely no light in the cave.
I could not handle that. You don't have a claustrophobic bone in your body, huh?
No, it didn't bother me. I mean, other people had done it before, so I figured nothing was going to go wrong. The thing they want is a dead tourist on their hands.
That is true. That is true. What's one of the biggest challenges that you find to traveling? One of the biggest challenges you have while traveling?
To be completely honest, traveling has become so much easier with smartphones. I began my travels in the period of time between when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone to when it went on sale. So when it actually was released, I was running around the Pacific. And after a couple months, I wound up in Honolulu again. And I had to go to an Apple store to check this out, because part of me didn't believe it, like that this was an actual thing. And I was like, wow. And so I kept traveling. And then later that year, I was in Tokyo. And I went to the Apple store in the Ginza district, and I bought, I don't even think they make them anymore, an iPod Touch, which is basically an iPhone that wasn't a phone. And that was just the greatest thing since sliced bread for me, because I could record audio. I could, do all this stuff that required other things before. And since then, it's just gotten easier and easier. I used to have to go to internet cafes all the time, and those aren't even a thing anymore. Used to have to get a SIM card if you went to a new country. Now I got the T-Mobile plan in the US. I can just travel internationally and, not even need to do that. So, man, finding what's difficult about traveling now, it's gotten so much easier. You can use the Google Translate app to talk to people in languages that you don't understand. That was never possible. A couple of years ago, I was in the Balkans. I flew into Skopje in Macedonia. I rented a car, no plans, no anything. I just pulled up Google Maps and said, plot me a route to Kosovo. Boom, drove, no problem. Maps were fine. Everything worked. So, man, it's not hard anymore. It's so easy. So if anyone has an excuse for not traveling, it is not legitimate. It is so easy to do now. Fear of foreign languages or anything like that, not an issue.
What's the one piece of advice you can give people that just want to get out there and travel for a couple months?
The one thing I always say is that your ability to adapt is more important than your ability to plan. And if you're going on this trip and it's a once in a lifetime trip, you're going to have a tendency to over plan. You're going to get the guidebooks and okay, day one we're going to do this, and at 12 p.m. we're going to go here, go to this cathedral, and we're going to do this. And I assure you, day one, all your plans are going to go out the window for whatever reason. Your flight's going to be delayed, or there's going to be rain, or something. Stuff happens. Um, to leave room in your schedule for serendipity, for changes in plans, whatever might happen, I think you'll have a much better experience than if you just try to follow a schedule and rush your way through it.
That makes sense. Where would be a good place? I've visited Europe. I visited a lot of places that have similar cultures to us. Where would be a good leaping off point if I wanted to visit somewhere that had a very different culture than what we have here, but wasn't incredibly difficult to travel to or to navigate?
The place that's really opening up right now is Central Asia. And these are the former Soviet republics with the word Stan. So you're talking Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Just a few years ago, it was very difficult to visit these countries because they all had onerous visa processes, and it was expensive to get the visa. In fact, when I went, I didn't need a visa for Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, but I did for Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And they changed the Tajik visa process like 30 days before I arrived. So half the people on the tour I was with just showed up at the airport and didn't have to do anything. And Uzbekistan has subsequently gotten rid of their visa policy. So, and tourism doubled. And you're going to find amazing things up in the Xi'an 10 mountains in Kyrgyzstan. I mean, that's, beats being up in the Rockies. You're in this really high latitude or altitude. You have nomadic guys who are playing their version of I would say it's like polo, but it's more like rugby. And it's instead of a ball, it's with a dead sheep. So you're going to be able to witness some of that. Samarkand in Uzbekistan. I mean, it's just a fascinating place, and it's becoming a lot easier to visit. And it's not a place that a lot of people would think of. And the word "stan," or it's not a word. I mean, like the suffix scares a lot of people because they think of Afghanistan or Pakistan and places with terrorism. These places are Muslim in the way that the Netherlands is Christian, right? I didn't see a single mosque. I didn't see a single woman with their head covered. They were very much secularized when they were part of the Soviet Union, and they're still that way today. English is not widely spoken, but you can certainly find guides and everyone else, and it's pretty cheap to visit there. And you'll find, again, great food and an experience that just not many people have had. So that's definitely a place I'd recommend. And there's going to be an opening, a very short opening. Tour companies, this has just hammered them. Even airlines are able to do a couple flights. Hotels have been able to book some rooms, but tour companies have been shut down completely. And there are some fantastic deals that are going to be opening up. If you ever wanted to go somewhere like Antarctica, where they are going to need to pack these ships, and this might be the best time to do it. So the Antarctica season is in the winter in the Northern Hemisphere. So it usually is November to early March. And so this year has basically been canceled, 2020. So 2021, when it starts, may have some fantastic deals. You still may have people that are going to be leery about traveling. I don't know what the situation is going to be then. Some places are taking bookings for 2022 right now. So you're going to be able to, maybe if it's a year out, maybe a little safer, but still pretty cheap. And I would definitely do that if you can afford it. Because if you can, also get on one of the ships that goes to the Falkland Islands and South Georgia Island, because they are actually more amazing than Antarctica in a lot of ways. But everyone wants to go to Antarctica because that's the sexy place. But they'll visit Antarctica on the way as well, and try to do that if possible.
Oh, very interesting. Good advice.
People, the question I get most often now when I do interviews and I talk to people is, "Oh, where's your first trip going to be?" And the truth is, I don't know, and I'm not planning it, because I got burned by that thinking I could go to China last April, and I'm just going to wait. And in the meantime, I'm just working on stuff here. I'm doing my podcast, and that time will come. I do not know when, and I do not know where. So,
Got you. When you travel around a lot, you can't carry many belongings. Is there something that you collect or that you've decided to take from every place you've been as a
I
memorabilia
did that
person?
initially at first. The problem was it's a lot of stuff to carry around.
Right.
So what I usually will end up doing is just keep some currency. You'll occasionally have a couple, not less than $1 sometimes, of whatever the currency is for that country, some coins. And so I'll keep some of that. And so now I have these like bricks of money. I mean, they look like something like a Coke dealer would, have stuffed under their bed, except it's all just tiny denominations from just every country under the sun. And I haven't even gone back to try to estimate the value of it, because if anyone were to steal it, it would be so time consuming to get any money from it, having to go, because you go to most currency exchange places and they'll do, euros, pounds, pesos, whatever major currencies are, but they're not going to be dealing with Laotian kip or Solomon Island business dollars or things like that. And especially if it's 50 cents worth of it.
Right.
So, by the time you factor in what they charge you'd get, nothing out of it. So
Oh, that'd be a pretty neat can to go through, though. I'd love to see how all these different currencies look.
one thing I do have, if you've ever been to the UK, this is a little weird thing they have, is that the Bank of England issues their own notes, and the Bank of Scotland issues their own notes, and the Bank of Northern Ireland issues their own notes. And a lot of places in England will not accept Scottish currency, even though it's the same country. Well, as it turns out, British territories also issue their own pounds. So the Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, Gibraltar, St. Helena, and a bunch of other places all have their own pounds, and I've collected all of them. And so what I want to do someday is to go to London and try buying something with like a Scottish pound and have them rejected, and then just go through every single pound from every other British territory. And then eventually it's like, oh, a Bank of England one. Okay.
I want to see that. You got to post. We got to do a YouTube or a TikTok for that one. Well, any final words of wisdom for would-be wanted travelers once COVID ends?
Do it. Yeah. I know a lot of people, they have regular jobs. They're not millionaires. And what they do is they work so they can travel, and they prioritize it. They don't buy second homes or jet skis and stuff. They spend that money on travel, and they use their vacation time for the purpose of traveling. And if travel is something you want to do, it can be done. This is the greatest time in the world. Well, not this time, this year, but in general, for traveling. You can pretty much go anywhere on the planet in an affordable way. You can stay, if you're creative about it, whether it's Airbnbs or couch surfing or things like that, affordably. You can eat affordably. So it can be done. It's really more about having the will to do it.
Well, I cannot wait. I am so anxious to get back out there. But I want to thank you, Gary, for being a part of this podcast. There's so much I didn't even talk to you about, so I could have you on here again. We didn't talk about your photography. I know you photographed over 400 UNESCO World Heritage sites, and I know it's a big part of your living is the photography, correct?
Yeah, I've been named Travel Photographer of the Year 3 times in North America. And when I started traveling, I didn't know anything about photography. I just bought an expensive camera that I thought would take good photos. And I learned very quickly that's not how it works. And so I basically had to teach myself over several years until I got to where I am.
Oh, wow. So you didn't even know you were going to get into photography. You just kind of happened into it.
Yeah, but there's a whole story, but I'd be happy to do another show to talk about it.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So thank you, Gary. If you want to learn, you want to see his podcast, listen to his podcast, you want to see his travel, anything, everything-everywhere.com is where you can get it all. So I'm going to go there before my next travels because
I am super easy to find online. Even if you type Gary and travel, you'll find me.
Just Gary. You don't even need your last name.
Just Gary and travel. If you just type Gary, you'll get Gary Vaynerchuk. But you got to put the travel part in, and then you'll find me.
Okay, so it's Gary, last name travel.
Yeah.
Again, we are sponsored by Dweebs Global. So if you're looking for no-nonsense advice, resume help, free mental health assistance, or really any advice at all, there's no catch. And it is completely free. So please please use dweebsglobal.org. It's free.